very happy to take questions.
Just on retail, the national election price gouging by Bunnings and other big box retailers. Do you think Bunnings is squeezing customers and suppliers?
Well, look, our first objective here is to make sure that consumers are getting the best possible value. Our role is not to ensure margins for big businesses. It's to make sure that consumers are getting hardware items and grocery items at reasonable prices. It's great that businesses are successful. We want them to be successful. We want them to be profitable, but we can't have price gouging, particularly where you've got market concentration. A little IGA store here can't compete with Coles and Woolworths, and we know that Coles and Woolies land bank and stop IGAs and food stores and other independents from establishing a presence in that market. And ultimately, we want a free market to operate effectively, and a free market is not where consumers are being ripped off. We want to make sure that, particularly where Bunnings has a more significant presence than it ever has, where Mitre 10 is probably the biggest competitor, but the margin between Mitre 10 and Home Hardware and others and Bunnings is astronomical. So it's right that we want the best outcome for consumers, and we've been very clear about that.
Should Bunnings and these other big box retailers be included in the grocery code, the food and grocery code?
Well, obviously there's a Senate inquiry that will look at these matters, but I want the best for consumers. At the moment, consumers are paying 11% more for food. They're paying 25% more for gas. They've had 12 interest rate increases under this Prime Minister. The Prime Minister promised to reduce electricity prices by $275, and power prices now have gone up by $1,000. So I want the best outcome for consumers. I want businesses to be profitable, but a free market means that businesses can operate in a competitive environment and that consumers can get prices which are reasonable, and that's the objectives that we apply.
What about the proposed divestment laws that you're proposing? Should Bunnings be included in that?
Well, again, we've been very clear about the application, not just to Coles and Woolies. We want to see more competition in the marketplace, because if you have a duopoly or a monopoly arrangement, then consumers ultimately aren't getting the best out of a free market. And the Liberal Party, the coalition, stands very strongly for a free market, and we've been clear not just in relation to Coles and Woolies, but also Bunnings as well. And I think that is something that would be welcomed by the Australian public.
The government just handed down the aviation white paper. Do you think consumers should get refunds if there are length of flight delays?
Well, look, a couple of points here. Firstly, it's late, which is not surprising, because I just don't think the government's had its eye on the ball when it comes to airfares. Any Australian knows that you're paying more for airfares. It doesn't matter whether it's an international flight or whether it's a domestic flight. I was up in the Northern Territory recently, in Mount Isa recently. One of the first complaints you get from consumers and from people who live in regional areas is that they feel they're being gouged on price. We need to be careful, because Bonza now has gone out of the market, and if Rex can re-establish itself, we can get better competition in the marketplace. But don't forget the friendship, the very close friendship between Alan Joyce and Anthony Albanese, which reduced competition ultimately with the decision around Qatar. We want to make sure that we've got a viable airline industry. We're a market of only 25, 26 million people. But the fact is that we need to make sure that consumers are getting the best outcome, and I think we can look at what is being provided at the moment and ask whether we can get a better deal as consumers, and I do think Australians can get a better deal than what they're getting at the moment.
On that white paper, you're proposing ombudsmen to force airlines to follow terms that include refunds rather than the European style of if it's 3 hours late, you get a refund. Do you think that would work better?
Well, look, we're happy to have a look at different proposals, but I think what we know at the moment is that this is a government that has presided over the closure of Bonza, Rex being put into administration, Qantas charging more for their airfares than we've seen in recent years, and less competition means higher prices. And unfortunately, Australians are paying more and more for airfares, and we should have more competition, and consumers should be paying less for airfares where there are more consumers wanting to purchase those airfares than prices going up and up under the Albanese government.
There's been 2 earthquakes in New South Wales near where you're proposing to build some nuclear power plants.
Yeah.
How do you know it'll be safe?
Well, firstly, because we've said that we will appoint an expert panel to look at all of the different aspects, the engineering aspects and the suitability for particular sites. We've chosen end-of-use coal-fired power stations because you can distribute to the existing network through the poles and wires. So you don't need 28,000 kilometres of new poles and wires going across national parks, across productive farming land, and ultimately just driving up the price of electricity. The cost of electricity has gone through the roof under this government, and now the electricity ombudsman is warning that we're going to see disruption. That is blackouts and brownouts under Labor, which I just don't think any family or business can afford to have that disruption to their lifestyle. What we know of nuclear power is that it is a very safe technology. The activity that we've seen in Newcastle, in the Hunter region and elsewhere around the world, it is a safe technology, and it would have dealt very adequately with the recent tremors that we've seen. I thought the fact that Labor was out there trying to make political capital at a time when people were, experiencing the tremors was a disgrace, frankly. But the Labor Party's always given to running scare campaigns, and I just don't think people fall for it. People look at what's happening with nuclear around the world. 19 of the 20 biggest economies have adopted nuclear or have signed up to it. They've done it because it's safe, it's zero emissions, it can deliver cheaper electricity, and it's a constant source of 24/7 power. Our economy will tank if we don't have 24/7 power, and it is needed to firm up renewables, because as we know, on a day like today, we get a great yield out of solar panels. If it's rainy like it has been over the course of the last week or so, it's a very low output of energy, and over night time they don't work at all. So you need to be able to keep the cold rooms going in an IGA or at a local Coles or Woolies. Otherwise, the economy just doesn't function.
Do you still plan to repeal the right to dissent?
Yes, we do. Look, I think what we've seen from the CFMEU and what we've seen from other unions is a desire to create animosity between workers and the employers where there's just no animosity before. So I hope that we can see a real consideration of the Australian economy. At the moment, Labor is slowly destroying the Australian economy. Costs are up for everything. We're talking about electricity blackouts. Insurance premiums have gone through the roof. And most employers do the right thing by their employees, and where they don't, there are existing laws to make sure that there are penalties that apply. But at the moment, I think the government's creating an environment of animosity and tension between employers and employees where it doesn't need to exist. Why are they doing that? Because that's what the CFMEU and the other big unions tell them to do. And as we've seen with the CFMEU, they have been dancing to their own tune, and the Prime Minister has been dancing to the tune of the CFMEU over the last few years. And we've seen building prices escalate dramatically, and we've seen builders go broke, which means it's hard for young home buyers to find a builder, and that's all because of the government's facilitation of the unlawful acts of the CFMEU.
With the Queensland election just around the corner, is there any trend emerging here against incumbency governments?
Well, there's certainly been a lot of analysis about what happened in the Northern Territory, but what we do know is where a government doesn't listen to the public and they're making decisions which make it harder for families to pay their bills, to pay their mortgage, and to make decisions where there is more crime in the community, less penalty for the crime, those governments will be punished. And the Albanese government has made our country less safe, and they have forced up the price of everything to a point where families really are doing it very, very, very tough at the moment. In that circumstance, you'd expect there to be a backlash against the government. The Albanese government is a bad government. Australians know after 2 years they're worse off under this government, and they know that they can't afford another 3 years of the Albanese government. The government's made decisions in budgets which haven't helped families, they've hurt families, and they've driven up the cost of everything. And when you look at Maggie Forrest and her example that she's setting in the community, out there talking to people, listening to people about crime and law and order, about ways in which we can keep our communities safe. Maggie's been out there talking to families about the cost of living pressures that they're under. That's the sort of family experience that we want in our candidates, and life experience otherwise. When you look at what the Greens are doing, the Greens believe in abolishing private health insurance, which is going to kill our public system and drive up the cost of private health insurance through the roof for families in Ryan. They want to legalise hard drugs, which will just drive the crime rates through the roof, which is not supported by the people of Ryan. We know that, as we saw when the damage was caused to monuments and to war graves, that the Greens had no criticism of that activity whatsoever, which is not consistent with the values of the people of Ryan and other communities, particularly other garrison communities across the country. We're not far from Enoggera Barracks here, and this community is full of defence families, and I think they're completely horrified by the reality of the Greens. The Greens aren't about the environment. The Greens are about radical change to our society and not for the better. And that's why I think Maggie Forrest is doing an amazing job here in Ryan, and we're going to continue to support her until she's the local member, because she will be a great voice for Ryan in Canberra, and she'll stand up for the people in this local community. Thank you very much. Thank you.